I was 22, juggling college classes and a part-time babysitting gig to make ends meet. It wasn't glamorous work, but it gave me time to study and escape the noise of my shared apartment. When my friend Natalie texted me about a last-minute job, I agreed before asking details. I needed the cash, and it was only a few hours on a Friday night. The house was tucked in a quiet cul-de-sac, the kind of place where front lawns were manicured and silence lingered. I rang the bell, clutching my tote. When the door opened, I expected a harried mom or maybe a grandma in slippers. Instead, there was him. "Hey," he said, offering a warm but reserved smile. "You must be Maya." He was taller than I'd expected, mid to late 30s, dressed in a fitted grey tee and jeans. His eyes were tired but kind. There was something soft in his voice, like he didn't raise it often. He looked like the kind of man who carried more than he ever let on. "I'm Eric," he added, stepping aside so I could enter. "Lila's already in her pajamas. She's usually asleep by 8. The inside of the house was modern but cozy. Toys scattered here and there, baby monitor on the counter, a faint scent of lavender in the air. He walked me through the routine. Milk, 1 story, lights out. Easy enough. Lila was a sweetheart, all curls and sleepy eyes. She clung to her stuffed bunny like it was her lifeline, then dozed off within minutes. When I returned to the living room, Eric was still there, coat in hand, but hesitating. "Listen," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "This is kind of awkward. I know most parents don't linger, but it's been a rough week. Would you mind if I just sat for a minute before heading out?" I shrugged. "Of course. It's your house." He poured 2 cups of tea and sat across from me on the couch. Conversation came surprisingly easy. We talked about books, music, even college. He listened with a kind of attentiveness that made me feel more seen than I had in months. As the clock ticked toward 9, Eric stood and stretched. "I should go," he said, picking up his keys. Then, just before opening the door, he turned. "Can I ask you something a little personal?" he asked, voice low. I froze, unsure. "Okay." He looked me dead in the eye. "Do you believe it's possible to feel something for someone you're not supposed to?" The air shifted. I smiled, deflecting. "I think you're asking the wrong babysitter." He chuckled softly, then left. But I didn't move for a long time after the door shut. Something had been planted in that moment, a question, a tension. And I had a sinking feeling it wouldn't stay buried for long. Eric started calling more often after that night. Nothing unusual on the surface. He'd ask if I was available to watch Lila, sometimes last minute, always apologetic. I told myself it was just about convenience. I lived nearby, I was dependable, and Lila liked me. But I also knew better. The second time I babysat, he left in a rush and didn't come back until late. The third time, he stayed home the whole evening. Said his plans fell through. We sat at opposite ends of the couch, but conversation flowed like we were old friends trying to catch up after years apart. He told me how hard the separation had been, how empty the house felt without laughter. I nodded, listened, not sure if he meant to confide in me or if he simply had no one else to talk to. "I never imagined I'd be raising her alone," he said one night, glancing at the baby monitor. "Some days I feel like I'm doing it all wrong." "You're doing fine," I replied gently. "She's happy. That's what matters." He looked at me like no one had said that to him in a long time. From then on, the atmosphere between us changed, subtly, but undeniably. I started wearing a little mascara before I came over. He started finding reasons to linger after Lila was asleep. Once, he offered me a glass of wine. I declined, but my pulse quickened at the offer. We never crossed any lines. Not yet. But we danced near them more than once. One evening, I was reading on the couch after Lila had gone down. Eric walked in, freshly showered, hair damp, wearing a black t-shirt that clung just enough. He sat down, closer than usual, and asked what I was reading. His knee brushed mine, not entirely accidental. "You know," he said, glancing at me sideways, "I never used to talk this much. Not until you started coming around." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "Maybe you just needed someone to listen." He smiled, and for a second, the air between us stilled, charged with something unsaid. But then, just like that, it passed. He leaned back, distancing himself with a quiet sigh. I packed up quickly when my time was done. As I reached for the doorknob, he spoke again. Maya, do you ever feel like something's happening, and you're not sure if you should stop it or let it happen? I turned to face him, heart racing. I don't know. Maybe it depends on what it is. He nodded slowly, like that answer gave him permission to keep wondering. I left with a knot in my stomach and a buzzing in my chest. We hadn't done anything. But we were circling something fragile, something dangerous, and I wasn't sure how long we could keep pretending it wasn't there. It was raining when I arrived at Eric's house again. Thick sheets of water blurred the windshield, making everything feel more isolated, like the rest of the world had been washed away. Eric met me at the door with a towel in hand. Storm came out of nowhere, he said, brushing his palm across his damp hair. I cancelled dinner plans. Figured I'd just stay in. Didn't want to reschedule with you, though. I nodded, stepping inside, pretending my pulse hadn't quickened at that confession. The house felt warmer than usual, dimly lit. Lila was already asleep, the monitor soft with the sound of her breathing. We ended up on the couch again, a movie playing half-heartedly in the background. But neither of us watched. We talked about his daughter, my classes, life in between responsibilities. The way he looked at me had changed. Less guarded. More present. I noticed his eyes lingered on my mouth when I laughed. I caught myself mirroring his body language without thinking. The space between us was thin. One breath, one mistake wide. Eric turned toward me slowly, eyes searching mine. Can I ask you something personal? I nodded before I could think. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Do you ever feel something for someone, even when every part of you knows you shouldn't? My breath caught. I do, I said quietly. I have. He looked up at me, the weight of his thoughts written across his face. Maya, I think about you more than I should. I wait for your texts. I look forward to you being here. Not just because of Lila. His honesty landed between us like thunder. I sat frozen, my heart slamming in my chest. Part of me wanted to run. The other part, the stronger one, wanted to stay right where I was. I think about you too, I whispered, barely recognizing my own voice. He reached for my hand, tentative, as if waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. The moment hung there, suspended in a breath. Then, slowly, he leaned in. His lips brushed mine, gentle, uncertain, yet achingly real. It wasn't a kiss born of passion or impulse. It was soft, deliberate, like he'd been holding it in for weeks. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us spoke. Words would only make it more complicated. We sat there, our hands still entwined, the storm outside echoing the storm inside us. I knew, in that moment, that we'd crossed the line we'd danced around for too long. It hadn't felt like a mistake. It had felt inevitable. But reality wasn't going to wait forever. And when morning came, we'd both have to decide what to do with the truth we had just breathed into life. The morning after was quiet. There were no declarations, no rushed goodbyes, just a stillness that filled the air like fog. Eric made coffee while I packed my bag, both of us moving slower than usual, as if acknowledging what had happened without needing to say it aloud. He walked me to the door, fingers brushing mine one last time. I shouldn't feel this way, he murmured, but I do. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to pretend it hadn't meant something. Me too, I whispered. But this can't go on, Eric. We both know that. He nodded, eyes heavy with something that looked like regret, or longing. Maybe both. That was the last time I babysat for him. The days that followed felt oddly hollow. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a message I knew wouldn't come. I told myself it was for the best. We had stepped into something we couldn't sustain, something that lived in the grey areas, between right and wrong, comfort and craving. He had a daughter, a life to protect. I had a future I couldn't afford to sabotage. But silence didn't erase memory. Weeks later, I ran into him at the grocery store. Lila was in the cart, smiling as always. Eric saw me, And for a second, the world paused. He gave me a soft nod, a polite smile. I returned it. That was all. No words. No touches. Just understanding. I walked away with tears in my eyes I hadn't expected. Not from heartbreak, but from clarity. Some connections don't need a destination to matter. They come into your life like a flare in the dark, showing you something about yourself, about what you need, what you're capable of feeling. And then, sometimes, they fade. Quietly. Respectfully. I never saw Eric again after that day. But I remembered the way he looked at his daughter like she was his whole world. I remembered how he listened without judgment, how he asked questions no one else dared to. And I remembered the way it felt, just once, to be wanted not for what I could do, but for who I was in someone's quietest moments. There are love stories that end with rings and vows. And then there are the ones that exist only between stolen glances, whispered confessions, and the space between what could have been and what was. Ours was the second kind. A line had been crossed, but not recklessly. With eyes open, with hearts heavy. And sometimes, that's all a story needs to leave its mark.